I'm not sure what it's doing. Okay, well, good. Well, thank you for good music, and I like seeing some of these old-timey outfits. That's good, thank you. I guess it's what preachers wore in the olden days, a black suit with a white shirt. That's about all I can come up with. I can't wear my leisure suit anymore. When I outgrew it.
I told Flo's one of the thing we're missing in the back of the church is the spittoon.
The spittoon. I think Flo still has the spittoon. She said at her house.
She said she's got the original.
The original spittoon. All right. Well, history's fun. My dad was a history teacher. He would have turned 90 this week if he was still living. It would have been his 90th birthday on Friday. But I used to like to go to field trips with him when he was a teacher. We go to the Natural History Museum in D.C. or the Museum of American History, or we like to go to the Manassas battlefield, and he'd take groups from his school, and I'd get to tag along. And he knew so much about history. I guess I kind of grew up loving history. And then when I got into college, my favorite class was church history. And I did a lot of reading on church history. And it's just, I've always found it interesting. Well, the Church of God has a history committee, and they decided a few years ago that they're wanting to put together a history of the Church of God, a general conference. And so they asked each of the local congregations to submit information about our church and our community for part of that project. And that was done. And they're in the process of assembling it. They're going to put it all together. So we'll have a pretty comprehensive history of the Church of God. And so with the help of Flo and Robert had some materials, and Debbie Grove had some materials and other things that I spent a good bit of the past year putting that together and presented it to the conference. But I thought it would be fun today to just kind of share with you some of the highlights. Some of these things will be things that you know. Some of these things will be stories that you might not have ever heard. So give you a little history about here. As I've been talking the last couple weeks about nostalgia, remember I said that the past is a nice place to visit, but we can't live there. So we're visiting now, but we're visiting with the idea of what are we going to do going forward. We learn lessons from the past, but we do not necessarily replicate the methods of the past. In other words, maybe what worked at one time. And in the past, the church met and they sat around the wood stove and the spittoon was there, okay? Probably worked for 100 years ago. It might not work so much now, but I think one of the most important ways of using history is to appreciate the sacrifices and the commitments that others made to make it possible for us. The church didn't just show up on this spot one day. A lot of blood, sweat, tears, prayer, hard work went into making this a place for us and for our children and grandchildren. And so we want to honor and remember those sacrifices and those commitments. In Hebrews 11, which I just read for you, tells about Israel's history. It mentions great men and women of faith that had gone before, people like Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Rahab and Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel. And the list just goes on of these men and women who lived by faith. They trusted God. They faced challenges and adversities, and they all did. If you look at their stories, there's not a single one that didn't face some sort of adversity or challenge, but they stayed faithful to God and to their calling. 1800 years after Jesus rose from the dead, the Church of God came to Browntown, Virginia. Yeehaw, right? 1800 years after Jesus died and rose from the dead, the Church of God came to Browntown, Virginia. And so what I'd like to do for just a few minutes is share some of the history of the Cool Spring Church of God. And then I'm going to give you a chance to share if there's any particular thought or memory that you want to share. We'll give you a chance to do that as well. So, Josiah, I don't know if you can see this very well, but Here's a picture, a diagram of the church in its various phases of the building. So we'll talk about that. And then down here is a picture of what the interior of the church looked like. But the church, now known as the Cool Spring Church of God, was organized by Elder N.J. Morgan and his wife, Sarah Morgan, in the year 1856. 1856. That's over 150 years ago. Meetings were originally held in the Grove and in schoolhouses, as well as in the homes of some of the brethren. So they met in schoolhouse, they met in people's homes. Brother B.J. Boyer and John Boyer did ministerial work for a number of years here. A meeting house was built in 1899 and continues to occupy the same spot, but has gone through many expansion projects. However, the original meeting house still exists on that spot. And if you were to, I can stand right here at this pulpit and look and see where the original meeting house was, right? It's in the back off of the fellowship hall. As noted above, before the meeting house was built, the congregation met in an old school building just a short piece down the road from us since 1856. It was the only school for the area children to attend at that time. It remained in use until 1936. Now here's where the fun part begins. That's when a strange thing happened. Seems there was a certain young man who fell in love with the schoolmarm. Now, the school teacher was an outsider, not from these parts, and not trusted by the young man's parents. They couldn't dissuade their son from the relationship. We can only guess the rest of the story because no one knows for sure how it came to happen, but the thinking of the concerned parents may have gone like this. The only way to end this irritation in their family was to end the romance. The only way to end the romance was to get rid of the teacher, and the only way to get rid of the teacher was to burn down the schoolhouse. That's why there's no building down there anymore. I think the foundation's still there, but there's no building on top of it. So, anyway, nobody knows for sure. Yes, sir.
Where that schoolhouse used to be,
Uh-huh.
Ruth still, in her younger days, lived up here to the farm. And she'd walk down there every day to teach school.
So she taught school there? Did she? Yeah. Well, at some point they decided to pool their resources and to build an actual building to meet in. And so that was constructed and they began meeting right over there. In 1899, it was completed and dedicated in August 1899 by Brother Samuel Wilson of New York. So apparently he was one of the preachers that came down and did the dedication service. One early attendee shared that he held the lantern outside of the buggy at night when they traveled back home from Browntown. So I guess they're coming down those dark roads at night, so they held the lantern out the window. That's why I said, Jeff, the methods might change. We don't necessarily have to hold a lantern outside of our vehicles anymore, but that's how they did it. The original building was 30 feet by 20 feet long, 30 feet wide by 20 feet long, so about 600 square feet. Inside the ancient front door, there is a circular plate in the ceiling, and it marks the spot where the stovepipe allowed the wood smoke to ascend. Also of special interest, there was a cuspidor beside the pulpit. I don't see a cuspidor up behind the pulpit these days. So what did they do? Did they spit towards the pulpit, or was that for the preacher, or was that for the deacons, or who was spitting in the cuspidor?
At my generation, they spit beside the stove.
What's that?
At my generation, they spit too much.
By the stove, that's where they had it, okay. The first recorded baptisms in the congregation were in 1877, Elizabeth Updike, Evelyn Updike, and Eleanor Updike. So that means that they met for 21 years before they had their first baptism. So that's called dedication, that's called commitment, right? The church did not have a regular pastor for many years. I guess it had irregular pastors, David, I don't know. But it relied on local and traveling pastors to come. And so they list the names of them. B.F. and J.D. Boyer, I think came over, was that from Fort Valley or Morristown? The other side of the mountain. Brother C. C.C. Wells from Pittsburgh conducted a series of meetings in 1880. Brother Wagoner of Rochester, Indiana, conducted meetings in November of 1900. Brother W.H. Wilson of Chicago had services in April of 1903. Brother Neal of South Bend in 1907. Brother S.J. Lindsay from Oregon, Illinois, conducted a meeting in 1909. Brother C.C. Maple of North Ridgeville, Ohio, which is real right close to where my wife is from, was held in the fall of 1914. Brother J.B. Creighton held services in July 1915. Brother J.H. Anderson pastored the church from 1916 to 1922. Brother F.E. Seipel of Oregon, Illinois, had meetings in May of 1925. Brother Harry Sheets pastored from 1925 to 1933. Then there's a period, I guess the church records got lost or destroyed or something. There's a gap from 1933 to 1951 that aren't available, but there's a recollection that during this time, the pastor of the Morrietown Church, which is over just south of Woodstock, so that's a couple mountains over, would come over on the fifth Sunday and have services here. And one of those preachers was Alva Huffer, who was later became the president of the Oregon Bible College and wrote the book Systematic Theology, if you've read that. So he would come over and preach on the fifth Sunday. First full-time pastor was C.F. Pryor from Hendersonville, North Carolina, who was also the school teacher, right, Flo? And Flo might want to tell stories about him. I think she might have gotten in trouble in school or something.
Oh, Miss Flo got in trouble.
Can you imagine?
I've heard too.
Well, I forget, not Miss Flo.
Pastor Stan Lawrence was here in 1955 to 1957, who I think my mother dated in college. Didn't you date him in college? I'm pulling all the skeletons out of the closet here. So my mother dated him in college for a little while.
She had us now. Come on.
Pastor Richard Dick from 1958 to 1960. Pastor Beulah Holt, 1961 to 63. Pastor Cecil Smead was here 63 to 71. Pastor James Rich, which I think we've got some pictures. Let's see. Okay, that's that's Pastor Pryor. Okay. Let's see. I think there's one in James. There's Pastor Rich, right? He was here from 71 to 76. Pastor Stephen Bolhouse, who was here 76 to 84. Pastor Dale Swartz was here from 1984 to 1988. Pastor Gary Smith, 1988 to 1995. Pastor Dale Ramsey, 1997 to 2011. And Pastor Jeff Fletcher, that would be for the last 10 years since 2011. Church has also produced pastors who have gone on to minister in other communities. So people that grew up here, Hollis and Hilda Partlow lived here, received the call to ministry, went to Bible college. He went on to pastor for many years in the Church of God. P.G. Coverstone, who was raised here, is now a pastor in Woodstock, Virginia. Marcy Bolhouse was a member here. She married Jason Turner. Together they pastor a church in Wisconsin. Other Cool Spring members who have attended Oregon Bible College or Atlanta Bible College are Flo Coverstone. What year were you there, Flo? 1960, Flo. Darlene Rogers, now Day. Rebecca Stubbs was Swartz. Joel Fletcher, Kaylin Fletcher, Catherine Madison was Fletcher, my daughter, Katie. So they all attended. There may be others, but those are the ones that I was aware of. The church got its name, Cool Spring, from the natural spring that sits across the road from the church. If you look outside that window, of course, you can see it. Weary travelers would come by horseback or carriage from nearby Front Royal or Helltown, Jeff, I think they used to call it back in the day, right? And they knew that they could stop here for a cool drink and refreshment. At the back of the property here, of course, is Goonie Creek. Water, many of you, how many were baptized? Anybody here that was baptized in the Goonie Creek? Some of you were? Yeah, back here in the Goonie Creek. Church building originally constructed in 1899, gone through many expansions. 30 by 20 was enlarged to 30 by 40 in 1952. 4 Sunday school rooms were added in 1954. a second addition and 2 Sunday school rooms in 1975. In 1989, a kitchen, fellowship hall, and 2 bathrooms. Of course, we know that before 1989, there was an outhouse right out where Jeff's sitting, right? That was a milestone. The church had indoor plumbing. Another expansion was completed in 2011, which is the area that we are in today. The project was paid for by 50 people who signed up annually to participate in is a $20 a month club, is right, wasn't it? $20 a month club. And it was paid for, and I think they paid it off in 8 years. The goal was 10, they paid it off in 8 years. Did not affect the operational budget. Cool Spring Church has been actively involved, part of the Virginia Conference and the General Conference. Many youth have actively participated in church camps, from Camp Mac in Indiana in the 1960s and 70s to Fuel in North Manchester, Indiana. Cool Spring youth have served on state quiz teams and in worship bands. A few years ago, we hosted the Up Project. Young people came from all over the country and did hands-on service projects. We've been very active over the years in Relay for Life. Jeff and Jennifer and Randy helped us. In 1 year, somebody came up to me and said, how did you get so many people in your church involved in Relay for Life? And he said, we were having a hard time getting anybody interested. So we've had a very good missions program. Debbie Grove has done an excellent job. And even through COVID, when we were struggling even to be able to meet, we continued to do our outreach and mission projects. Church has been active in ministry within the community for many years, so serving in Hidden Springs, giving devotions and music and fundraising, ringing bells for the Salvation Army, supporting the homeless, feeding the hungry. Every year we look forward to gathering here for our fall festival. Many children and adults have enjoyed vacation Bible schools. So a number of families who currently attend Cool Spring have roots that go back to the 19th century congregation. 2 little sisters, Ada and Grace Updike, walked with their mother Carrie to the church to deliver lunch to the workmen, carrying the lunch in a molasses bucket. This little church became an integral part of their lives. Grace married Harry K. Grove. Their children were Nina, Harry, Robert Sr., Betty, and A.B. All attended or were members of the Cool Spring Church. As adults, Nina Hicks, Betty Rudisil, which was the first wedding at Cool Spring. A.B. Britt moved from the area. Nina helped establish the Royal Village Church of God, which is now Grace Fellowship in Front Royal. Robert married Mabel Height. Their children were Harry Robert Grove Jr. and Thomas Michael Grove. Robert and Mabel were members of the Cool Spring Church with their children. Harry married Deborah Durham, and their son Harry III. Bobby married Vicky, so that's Bob and Debbie Grove. Ada Updike married Mac Updike. The daughter Marie married Pete Cooper. Marie was also a lifelong member. Her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren also attend Cool Spring. Marie's children were Margie, Billy, Flo, hey, that's you, and Jackie. Margie and Billy are deceased. And of course, since this was written, Jackie also died. Flo married Robert Coverstone. Hey, that's you, from Fort Valley. They were married here in 1962, which was the second wedding at Cool Spring Church of God. All right. That's right.
She said that's wrong.
Oh, that's wrong? Okay.
Billy got here.
Oh, did he? Okay, all right. We'll have to send an edited version to the conference. So we got a number of, anybody else? I know Anthony and Laura were married here.
Just throw us out.
They were married here in 2015. Okay, all right. Anybody else married here? Oh yeah, Jeff and Randy were married. Right up here. Okay, all right. Personally, I know when I was a kid, we used to come up here. My dad, I guess he was one of those random traveling preachers who would come up here from time to time and preach. And I think Miss Jenny was a Sunday school teacher back then, weren't you, Miss Jenny? Yeah. All right. So, listen. Let me turn this light now. See if it'll show a little bit better. That's a little bit better. Who's that, Flo?
Marie Parker.
Marie, okay.
Cliff White.
Go back one. All right. That's Flo's mom. I don't think you can see that, isn't it? Yeah. They called her Big Mama. Right, okay. All right. There's some more of our. Okay, you can go ahead and scroll a few things. That's some of the Grove family. The Updike family. That's Bob and Debbie. That's a couple years ago. This was in 1989, a group of ministers that were all here. That was their 90th, the 90-year celebration was there. And wait, back up. That's RJ. Where's RJ at? There he is. That's RJ, and then upper left is PG, and then that's Mike Reardon on the front over there. And then the back is Steve Madison. So that was the Virginia boys at National Camp. And this was the church in what? 90s? 90. All right. And keep going. All right. This more recently, this is a Christmas program. In 2018. Okay. Keep going. There's one of our mini hay rides. And keep going. And I think that's Anthony eating a pie there. Yeah. Did you win this year's pie eating contest?
Yeah, because you forfeited.
Yeah, because I got a cramp. It was an injury.
You got a cramp.
All right, this was our quizzers a couple years ago. You might recognize James. There's playing at the Hidden Springs for Christmas time. And there's a group doing Relay for Life. And look at there. Look at there. I think Flo's wearing the same bonnet today, isn't she? All right. And that's one of our baptisms. That's my daughter Cassie getting baptized in the Goonie Creek a few years ago. And Mike and Nathan playing on the riverbanks. Okay. There's another of our year we had all girl quizzers at Fuel that year. There's some Bible school. That's Sally teaching Bible school. And there's some more Bible school. And that's worshiping. I think that was the year I came, 2011. And then that's during COVID. You know, we worshiped outside last summer. So there's some of us. That was the dedication in 2011. And then that's working on fixing up the old sanctuary and making a little museum area, which go check it out if you haven't seen that lately. And then of course there's the spring. All right. Anybody else have any other memories they want to share? Hard to go through 150 years that fast, but anything else? Anybody's got a special memory they want to make sure we don't overlook? Yes?
I remember the first time I come up here with Wilford, they was having lunch and there was a little part. And he was his sister and her husband, when she was also around him as a pastor too. And then he came close then, he drove me up here. I was petrified, I was gonna eat. And Aunt Ada, bless her heart, she said, I'll eat with you.
Aw.
Since we were gonna eat, come on. So I finally ate a little bit with her, but I've changed the whole.
You're not afraid to eat anymore, are you, Jim?
I'm not backward.
Thank you. That's a good one. That's a good one. Yes?
We talked about paying people does things in church back when we used to minister. So that this Sunday, you didn't get any money. My great grandmother took you home with Daddy. Then she fixed a little bag with the chicken and potatoes paid. He didn't make any money.
He got a good chicken dinner from Big Mama. All right.
First thing I remember about the Cool Spring Church, I used to come over here with my parents when I was just a boy. And an all-day meeting, and there's a big tree on the other side of the church. And they had the drinks there, and there's a table that reached down, put her to the creek, was full of food. And, that's the first thing I remember about church here.
I wasn't,
I was probably 6 or 7 years old.
Did you? You were a little guy then. Yeah.
Didn't know I was gonna end up here as a big boy.
She went college to come back for her love life,
She came back to.
and Ada told me all about it.
in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th grade, I had, my ministers was my teacher, and that was horrible.
Couldn't get away from him all week, and then you couldn't get away from him Sunday.
Give each person 4 pennies in the morning, so I don't need this, 4 pennies. And after he lost them all by talking, he got a whipping. Of course, I got a whipping, and he told me, he said, "Well, do not tell your mother." She'll. So after I was married, he come back for a while, he said, "Well, I think it's time you and I be honest." He said from the pulpit what he done.
He finally told the truth about giving you that whipping, huh? Oh, thank you. Anything else?
I miss those little chocolate pies that Mildred and Dee framed, they used to make and bring up here.
Little chocolate pies? Oh,
And
that's,
they was little miniature like you buy now, there's a little bigger than ones you buy in the store.
It
They
was
hold
better
everything
than
things.
you.
that sounds good. I'll take some chocolate pies for sure. All right. Well, the community that where we are has changed a lot in 165 years. What began in homes and in a little schoolhouse from a small farming and industrial community, now it's become a place where all the wealthy folks from the city want to come in here and build their weekend homes and retirement homes and so forth. Airbnbs, we got Airbnbs and bed and breakfast and all that. The community's changed. The horse and buggies, you don't have to hold your lantern up with the horse and buggy anymore. Now you can drive your Ford pickup or your air-conditioned tractor. But the Cool Spring Church has been a witness in this community in various places and forms for over 150 years to the people who live here and now around the globe, to God's praise and glory. May they continue to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ until he returns. Amen. So, Hebrews 11 finishes up, "These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," and that's what this has been. There's a great cloud of witnesses. These are the men and women who went before us. "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us," right? They ran their race. Now it's time for us to run our race. With perseverance, that means don't give up. Don't give up. "For the joy set before Jesus, he endured the cross." He was willing to suffer to achieve God's mission for his life. "Scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." So brothers and sisters, we don't want to grow weary and we don't want to lose heart. We want to continue doing the things that God has called us to do. "The new heavens and the new earth have yet to come in their fullness. All these wise men and women went to their graves, having not yet received fully what God had promised. When Abraham died, the only land that he owned was the plot of land that he had bought for his wife to bury Sarah when she died. Later, God gave his descendants a land that was promised, but they had to endure 400 years of slavery before they received it. Abraham went to his grave living in faith. One day, at the coming of Jesus Christ, Abraham will receive the full measure of the inheritance that God promised him. The same is true for Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and David and Solomon. And the same is true for those men and women at Cool Spring who preached and taught Sunday school and invited their families and friends to church, who built the first building and each addition that followed. All of those men and women went to their graves, did so in faith. They gave and served, and they kept this church alive. From a 600 square foot little room with a wood stove and a spittoon to the building that we have today, each generation has faithfully served and God's word has been proclaimed. I pray that our generation will prepare the next generation for the coming of Jesus, the kingdom of God, and their reward, right? So just as Anthony and Laura are raising up their boys in this church, I pray that if Jesus doesn't come for another generation, that generation will continue to have a witness here. Let us be willing to make the same commitments and sacrifices that they made. I'm not going to lie to you, the last 2 years have been tough, and you all know that. You've lived it along with me. The world in which our children and our grandchildren are living is not friendly towards God or the biblical faith, but we still have a lot of work to do. Let us be faithful. Let us do what Jesus did and fix our eyes on the joys set before us, the vision of the new heavens and the new earth. I had a quote here. I can't find the quote, who it was from, but basically it was talking about the well out there. They said, at times the well has gotten low, but it's never run dry. And that's our prayer for the church. It may get a little low sometimes, but let it never run dry. Let us be faithful to Jesus. So we're going to sing 2 songs as we close. The first one is Faith of Our Fathers, number 407, and then we'll close with Find Us Faithful.